Mr. Mayor, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I was asked to talk tonight about Carl Bildt, who can't be with us, who is entering the club of the winners of the Atlantic Council Freedom Award. For the record, most of you know that he was Sweden's foreign minister from 2006 to October 2014, and before that, a young and reformist Swedish prime minister from 1991 to 1994. He then became a renowned international diplomat and negotiator. He served actually around 20 years ago as EU Special Envoy to the former Yugoslavia, the High Representative for Bosnia and Herzegovina, the UN Special Envoy to the Balkans, and the co-chairman of the Dayton Peace Conference. And it was 20 years ago that he gained this experience in Europe of borders being moved, ethnic cleansing, and armed conflict. And this experience, I believed, taught him at least two things. First of all, that ethnic conflict and war in Europe are possible. And secondly, that to end them, you need strong resolve and forceful action by the international community. Now, from his time in the Balkans, he brought not only experience, but also a lovely friendship with a lovely lady, Anna Maria Corazza, who is today an Italian who serves in the European Parliament as a member of the European Parliament from Sweden, a tribute to how tolerant and appreciative of highly qualified women we are in Europe. And I'd just like to convey to you what it's like to be friends with Carl Bildt. I don't know how many of you have seen a movie, I think it was called The Sum of All Fears. Anyway, this is a classic Hollywood scene of an international crisis. The White House or the Kremlin, a speech by the president, and suddenly in the audience, the phones are beginning to ring. And within 30 seconds, all the phones are ringing, and the party is over because there's an international crisis. Well, imagine an even more picturesque surrounding, an ancestral castle in Italy on a hill, medieval towers, Anna Maria's ancestral home, and a wedding anniversary party. I can't remember Anna Maria's speech, but I remember the punchline. Carl, throughout our marriage, you've given me more laptops than roses. And then the phones start to ring. It's the Russians invading Georgia. And Carl being at the time the chairman in office of OSCE, the next morning we were all on our planes and our holidays yet again ruined. Another enduring memory I'll have of Carl is the debate in the European Council after the little green men in Crimea and started doing what they were doing, and a spirited debate in the European Council between, I think, our Lithuanian colleague and our Western European colleagues, whether this was an invasion. And you can well imagine who was on which side. And Carl said, colleagues, let's not argue whether it's an invasion or not an invasion, because maybe the invasion is still to come. Let's just call it an act of aggression. And of course, you know what the legal implications of those words are, and they were, of course, much more severe. And then we went to a godforsaken place called Benderi, which was significant in the 18th century. It's a Ottoman castle in today's Transnistria. This is as obscure as it gets in Europe. This is a self-declared republic, frozen conflict on the borders of Ukraine and Moldova. And Karl particularly insisted we go and see this Ottoman fortress because back in the 18th century, after the Battle of Poltava, this is where the King of Sweden, Charles XII, spent literally several years before the Sultan would let him go home, where Sweden was ruled from. And this was classic Karl, sense of history and reaching down to the brass tacks to really understand a place where conflict might occur or is already occurring. He was a wonderful colleague to me in working on European Union's Eastern Partnership. We were, Poland and Sweden, a great fit. Sweden, an older, wealthier member state. We, a bigger, closer to the actual neighborhood. And together we managed to persuade all of the European Union to launch a program, which we originally intended to offer to Russia as well. Let us never forget that it's Russia herself that refused to participate in Eastern Partnership, because Russia does not regard itself as a neighborhood country of the EU. And a program that was meant to very slowly start extending the benefits of trade and of European legal culture was, of course, brutally challenged by President Putin in Ukraine, but whose potency remains. The fact that hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians manifested and risked their lives and continue to suffer in order to get closer to Europe, I think shows that it was a good idea. Lastly, let me just say that in politics, there is usually some give and take. Karl, I think, wanted to pass on some of his experience of a negotiator to colleagues and had the excellent idea of establishing a European Institute for Peace, a place where conflicting parties could get some professional negotiating help. And I, in gratitude to the United States and to the wonderful work that the National Endowment of Democracy did for many years, had the idea of establishing a European Endowment of Democracy. Well, Karl said, well, I need your support on AIP. I said, well, I need your support on EED. I'm glad it worked out that we were able both to pull it off. Karl, we expect you here any moment. You're a great friend of freedom. This award is richly deserved. Thank you very much.
Please welcome the Swedish ambassador to Poland, Staffan Hedström.
In 1991, I became State Secretary in the Prime Minister's office when Carl Bildt became the Prime Minister. I'm honored to be here and read his speech on his behalf. Let me first say I'm truly sorry not to be there with all of you tonight to receive this prestigious award. I will reserve my comment on the customer service of a major unnamed airline having its hub in Frankfurt to another occasion. But something pretty vitriolic is called for. I'm sorry not to be there for a number of reasons. One is that I'd looked forward to having the award introduced by Radek Sikorski. It's not only that we are friends and that we served together as foreign ministers of our respective countries during some critically important years. During those years, Radek became the respected and recognized voice of a truly new Poland in the new Europe we are trying to build, as well as across the Atlantic world. He certainly spoke both plainly and with passion, but he was listened to by each and everyone, and Poland during those years had an impact on the foreign and security affairs of Europe well beyond its size. Together, we launched the Eastern Partnership of the European Union. A previous Russia-first policy by the EU was replaced by a policy of us listening also to our more immediate Eastern neighbors and their desires and needs. And this was another important building block in the efforts that have engaged so many of us over the years to build a Europe whole and free, democratic and dynamic, and firmly part of the Atlantic world. The past quarter of a century has been revolutionary. For me, it was a question of bringing my country, Sweden, from the neutrality of the past into the political alliance of the European Union, as well as a closer partnership with the Atlantic Alliance. But during those years of the early 1990s, of helping the three Baltic states come out of the darkness and re-establishing their independence, and then the decade of the step-by-step enlargement of both the Atlantic Alliance and the European Union, with 100 million people in 10 nations stretching from the Gulf of Finland down towards the Bosphorus. Perhaps this was the best of our times, but it has also been a period of increasing challenges in other respects. I used to be told that I belonged to something called the post-war generation, only to find out that this unfortunately was wrong. I'm now, so to say, on my fifth war in Europe. Bosnia. I vividly remember the thunder of the guns around and in Sarajevo 20 years ago these very days. Kosovo 1999, Macedonia 2001, Georgia 2008, and then Crimea, Donbass with the Russian aggression there since early 2015. 5 wars, and now a time when we by no means can exclude that this is the last. Times have indeed become more complex, more demanding, more difficult, more dangerous. And we have to draw the right conclusions, to stand together to defend the core principles of peace and security. The borders and boundaries of Europe are sacrosanct. Many have been drawn by blood during the difficult centuries behind us. The task of our generation is to firmly resist any effort to change them by force and to equally work to reduce their importance for our citizens and societies by policies of integration and cooperation. Towards our east, the challenge in these respects are obvious: to resist and stop a revisionist Russia, to do it now. Otherwise, we will see the consequences tomorrow. This can only be done if we work together. A united Europe, a strong Atlantic alliance, a fractured Europe and a weakened Atlantic will be a dangerous Europe and a dangerous world. But also to clearly open up to cooperation and integration. Today to Ukraine and others that have themselves chosen this path, tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, or perhaps only the day thereafter, when also the great Russian nation chooses the same course. But we also have to defend our values in the wider world. We shouldn't be shy in saying that the bonds across the Atlantic are bonds of values that have brought open governments and open economies to much of the world and taken us into an age of globalization that has been perhaps the best mankind has ever seen. This is worth being proud of, and this is worth defending. As China sooner or later has to enter a genuine modernization, as Africa and its rapidly growing billion rises, as the Arab and Muslim world goes through its turmoils and tensions, the torch of freedom has guided the best of mankind during the best of its time. We must continue to hold it high and to do it together for a better future for us all. I thank you for the award and regret not being there with you. Thank you.